Welcome back to the Complete Student Podcast, everybody. We are so excited to be here with you for today's episode. Again, my name is Jay Dunstan, and
I'm Jackson Norton.
Yes, and today we've got another great episode for you, all about discussing how as Christians we're to respond to different things that are happening within our culture today. That's what this season is all about. And this is episode 3, I believe. So we're going to jump right in. It's going to be exciting. Jackson, today, what are we talking about?
So today we are talking about Kanye West and primarily his shift towards being more Christianity-oriented back in 2019, which I think, at least for me, was a little bit of a shock at the time. Mm-hmm. I never really believed him to be someone that would take Christianity seriously. I kind of just thought he would vaguely talk about God his whole career. I never expected him to profess that he's born again or to start preaching or even drop an album called Jesus is King. Mm-hmm. But Kanye has been sort of back and forth on Christianity for a while now. I think he said in early interviews that he didn't believe in giving his life to Jesus. He did mention that he believed in Jesus as an icon, though, which, at least for me, isn't a clear picture of his beliefs, although that isn't really a problem for me. I don't know that I have any need to know the details of his personal salvation. You know, that's not particularly my focus. I think the purpose of this conversation is to dive into the effects that platform and influence can have on culture. Because Kanye is massively popular. Regardless of if he's well-liked, he's absolutely well-known. His name recognition alone is beyond what most people will ever experience, which is why I want to ask, what was your first reaction to this shift, both in his career and his character, when he shifts from being sort of old-school Kanye to Christian Kanye?
Right, yeah, which old-school Kanye is a kind of an interesting way to frame it, too, because for those who have followed Kanye for a long time will remember in his early albums his reference in his song Jesus Walks. Yeah. So I feel like there's always been an element, and just kind of having heard a little bit of Kanye West's backstory a little bit, knowing that, like, as a lot of people, entertainers who grew up either in the Midwest or in the South have all kind of been exposed to Christianity from a young age. I think I've read that his dad was very much a professing Christian who definitely tried to do his best to raise Kanye in sort of the belief system of Christianity. And so, like, knowing where he's come from an early age, kind of through his musical career, I think we've had this picture of not just since 2019, but I think even from the earlier stages of Kanye West being an entertainer and an icon, we've seen sort of this journey that he's been on spiritually, where he's been trying to discover exactly what it is that he believes. And I think it just became more of, like, prominent for him, or more of like a key issue in his life, I would say, more in 2019. But I think it's super interesting. You asked me what my reaction was to sort of his professing to be a Christian and whatnot. And I honestly have had two very different reactions to Kanye West becoming a Christian. Okay, so my first reaction, and honestly, these two reactions they're probably very contradictory to one another. Okay, so the first reaction that I have as a professing Christian myself is a little bit of judgment. And I'm going to be honest, like, I think that most of us would probably say on some level or another, like, we've had a level of judgment. That's just the Pharisee within each of us to just, like, immediately want to jump in and judge him. And so my first reaction is sort of to judge his actions and say, like, okay, there's no way that he's a Christian, right? Like, I'm sort of looking at his whole spectrum of what he's done or what we've been able to see him do in the public limelight and go, like, well, for someone like me, and I think we do this a lot with people who have just entered the faith, we expect them to be able to walk it out in the same way that someone like me, who's been a Christian for most of my life, would walk their faith out and say, like, well, he doesn't, like, exhibit this sort of behavior. He doesn't do these sort of things. He's, doesn't have this. I feel like his attitude maybe isn't quite right on all these different things. So my first reaction is sort of to judge his lifestyle and be like, I don't see how he's living this Christian lifestyle. But also kind of looking at it and thinking, well, like, there is sort of like this command in the Bible for us to sort of judge others who are in our faith in Christianity. Like 1 Corinthians 5:12, it just says, it isn't my responsibility to judge outsiders, but it certainly is your responsibility to judge those inside the church who are sinning. Paul is talking to the Corinthians, and he said that in response to this guy in the Bible who was, like, sleeping with his stepmother, and they were like, Paul was just like completely like, whoa, like, y'all haven't done anything about this? Y'all, so, like, you kind of have this air of, like, well, we do on some level have to be able to judge one another based off of like this shared faith. And it's totally different when we're not judging those who don't share our faith, but this look at Kanye and say, okay, he's professing to be a Christian, and now my first line is to like begin to judge him, and yet I'm trying to figure out like where do I, like to what level do I judge this guy? But then I also have to remember that like where I'm at in my spiritual journey is not going to be where someone else is at who's just coming into their faith, right? So we're all there's this phrase that here at Bellevue Christian Center, one of our core values is that we are all people in process, right? Yeah. So there's this understanding that like everyone's on their own journey. Like we're not all at the same starting point, and our pace in this journey isn't all the same. And so we're just recognizing that he's a person in process. And I've sort of been living under this mentality or this mindset lately that you've maybe heard me say this, but that like intentions matter, right? Like our intentions matter. Like people may not get it right all the time, and as Christians we certainly don't get it right all the time, and I'm not expecting Kanye, just because he's this public icon, to feel like he's gonna get it right all the time. But there's sort of this idea that like our intentions matter. Like even if we don't get it right, like what was your intention? Now again, the hard part is that like we can't judge people based off of their intentions, right? Like that's not our job to do. In fact, in 1 Kings 8:39 says God alone knows what's in every human heart. And Paul in 1 Corinthians, again, Paul 4:5, he says that we should refrain from judging someone else's heart, but allow God to do that. Yeah. So this whole like thing of like coming into this conversation about Kanye and what's sort of my reaction, like that whole initial reaction of judgment is really hard, because I'm like, on some level, I want to judge him as another believer, but I also can't really judge all of his intentions because that's not my place. But, you know, we judge it based off of like someone's fruit. Like, are they bearing fruit? And we look at the fruits of the Spirit and say, do we see these things played out in his life? Do we see these things, or him attempting to exhibit these sort of fruits of the Spirit as he's growing? And so we've had some conversations lately, particularly in terms of this intentions matter point. Me and you have had some conversations lately where there was someone that we were both recently listening to at an event, and I won't mention any names, but this guy sort of was messing around, and he made sort of this, like joking around with people, made sort of this racist comment that I think, I don't want to judge again intentions, but I sort of think that like maybe in the moment got ahead of himself and said something he shouldn't have said, right? So, and I when I went and talked to him about it, sort of his response was, well, I hope you know my heart. Like, I didn't mean to be offensive. Essentially saying, like, I hope you know my intentions. And again, for me as a Christian, it's not my job or my role to be able to judge someone based off of their intentions. I just can't do that. All I can judge from Christian to Christian is your actions and your fruit. And so that's sort of where my reaction to Kanye West is at, is just saying, okay, like, I love the fact that he's this public icon, he's this public figure, and he's coming out saying, I'm a believer in Christ. And he's starting to show some of that through like his music. Again, we said Jesus is King. Then we mentioned, you know, his latest album, Donda. Like, all of these things are sort of like this blend of who Kanye West was and who he's becoming. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of see this progress. And so like my reaction is like, I'm really happy for him to be able to like have discovered new life and new hope in Jesus Christ, and to be able to try to integrate those things, which is what this podcast is all about, right? Like trying to integrate our faith into our everyday life. And I feel like he's making strides to sort of try to do that. And it's definitely going to look different for someone like him who's in the public spotlight than it is for someone like me who, like, you know, no one's watching me Absolutely, like they're watching Kanye. So yeah, what's sort of your reaction? I know I just talked for like 10 minutes, but
well, yeah, it's all good content. And right along those lines, I think my reaction was somewhere on this realization that, like, I don't know if you've heard, like, fame makes you more of who you are. Fame just amplifies your personality. Mm-hmm. And in this Christian lifestyle where you have to die to yourself, Kanye, at his level of fame, has more to die to than pretty much anyone I can think of.
That's very true, yeah.
And so there's so many layers to pull back. And so to expect this perfect Christianity out of Kanye, I don't think we can expect him to be Craig Groeschel anytime soon. Yeah. And I think of, you know, you mentioned that event that we were at. And it's a similar feeling watching Kanye and then watching that guy. As again, I don't want to pass judgment, but it is this realization that this person who I don't know if their actions and I don't know if their intentions are lining up with the heart of God, have this influence and this power to proclaim things about God. We're at a Christian event proclaiming Christian things, and Kanye is now a Christian proclaiming Christian things.
Right.
But my fear, and I'll admit it's a fear as a Christian who cares about the influence and the perception of the church, is this person going to accurately represent the heart of God, and how are they going to affect public perception of Christianity? It's almost like it's in Avengers Endgame when Thanos gets the gauntlet and all the stones, and it's like, oh no, the worst person possible has all of the power, like Kanye West, who has this massive platform. In my mind and in my like heart, is like maybe not the best person to hold that. And then I listen to Jesus is King and I hear some good gospel. I will admit, I think I'll be honest with you guys, Use This Gospel is my personal favorite song. And
my favorite is Close on Sunday.
That gets a little too closer to like cringy Christian culture. But I love Kanye's music. Before and after the change, I don't know if I should say that. Before and after the change, I love his music. I think he's an incredible artist. I think he's very, very talented. And so, listen, I hear some genuine gospel in there. I'll admit Jesus is King could be just as equally argued an album about money to an album about God. I think the ratio of those is pretty even. Yeah. But I don't mind. I really do enjoy his content, and I enjoy the amount of gospel that was in that album. Yeah. And seeing some areas of shift for him and maybe some 2 steps forward, 1 step back in recent times. I think for me it's just been I'm very excited because anytime someone comes to Christ, I'm excited. Yeah. But B, being worried that this influence of this platform is in the wrong hands. Yeah. And I think having peace knowing that like God anoints everything and that like God is the one ordaining authority and power, and having that idea in my head that like, yes, maybe in my mind this isn't perfect, but I do have trust that like God has got it covered. Mm-hmm. That God wasn't like, wait, Kanye for real? Like Kanye knew it was going. Kanye. See now I'm getting on Kanye's level.
Which icon are we talking about? Which is getting dangerously close to the Donda album.
Exactly. I don't know that God was surprised by that. He knew Kanye would be in this position, and so having peace in that. But again, just being worried about how influence affects our culture. So I want to ask you, how do you think Kanye's platform and his influence affects public perception of Christianity and Christians?
Yeah, and just to tag off with something you were just saying, just kind of about, God's not surprised. I think like something we were talking about recently was that like God's not like necessarily looking for a solution. He's looking for vessels to carry his solution, and if Kanye is willing to open himself up to be a vessel to carry the message of Christ to the rest of the world in a way that like someone like me or you will never have the platform to be able to like influence people towards Christianity in the way that he has, I think it's super important for us to like want to champion that, celebrate that, pray for him in that, and want to just sort of like be behind him as best as we can, like in whatever ways we can support through prayer and whatever, just kind of just wanting to see this as an opportunity and make the most of it. Obviously, like his sort of like how his influence is kind of going to shape the view of Christianity around the world. It's super interesting because I think on one level, like we're seeing Kanye live out his faith or explore his spirituality in a very similar way that I think a lot of other people are exploring faith or trying to figure out what they believe or trying to, navigate, their spiritual journey. We see this playing out right before us through Kanye, right? So like the biggest difference between someone like us or someone else who's coming to faith and then Kanye is that like we literally get an inside look into almost every aspect of this man's life, right? So he has this fishbowl type of life experience where everybody's able to see him swimming and see whether or not he's doing a good job swimming or a bad job swimming. I think what's important for us as Christians and how we respond to it is that like the way that other people are going to view Christianity or view others who share this faith is going to be largely based upon how we accept Kanye and his conversion and his experience. Like if we don't support him and trying to help him to grow and be encouraged in his faith, then other people are going going to view us as Christians as like being, again, way too judgmental, outdated, all of these different things, because we don't know how to even support one of our own who's saying like, I'm exploring this and I'm trying to figure this out and I'm trying to walk this journey. And like, it's really interesting just talking about his last two albums, right? So you have like Jesus is King, which is, again, 2019, near the time of his conversion. And it was very much this album of like, I'm a new creation. Yeah. Here's what I've explored. I'm going to celebrate this. I'm celebrating Jesus. I'm worshiping him. This is my expression of that on some level in that album. And then I feel like with his latest album, Donda, it's very much this expression of like, okay, here's who I was before Christ and here's who I am now. And there's sort of this like, how can I marry the two, right? So I think like in some ways, Donda got back to some of his original, like the way that he made music before, but like still had this blend of like, how do I integrate these two? Or I'm a new creation in Christ, but I'm still me, right? So I'm still this new person, but I'm trying to figure out like how these worlds work together. I think it's so interesting to just be able to watch someone like on a public scale try to work out their salvation in this process, this Christian word that we use called sanctification, of like trying to figure out, okay, what does this look like to be alive in Christ? What does this look like to grow in my faith? What does this look like to like have to make decisions that are informed based upon the faith that I hold? And so I think the way that we respond as Christians towards Kanye will ultimately be the way that the rest of the world views Christians and Christianity. So that's sort of my thoughts. What do you think about it?
Well, I completely agree. I think even bigger than Kanye, the conversation of how do we treat Christian celebrities, I think we have a long way to grow. I think the church at large could do better at recognizing and accepting Christian celebrities. I don't know if you remember what happened to Lauren Daigle, but girl got canceled for a couple of comments and a couple of like maybe not even missteps, just not doing it the way that we would have preferred.
Right. And we don't have her platform, so who are we to judge?
Yeah. And so we see her and we're like, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. It's like, well, she's in a bit of a different position than you are. Maybe try and get into her mindset.
Yeah.
And when we think about Kanye, we've talked about Justin Bieber before we started rolling.
My favorite. Yes.
Yeah. Andrew Garfield recently, I don't know if recently, but has said, he's very good friends with Jesus. And I saw so many comments of like, well, Christianity isn't about a friendship, all right? It's about a relationship. And I was like, why is the first inclination that we have, our first reaction to someone expressing interest in this life, to say, well, you're already doing it wrong? Well, of course, like, if I'm going to take a calculus class and my first problem, the professor's like, no, you're doing it wrong. It's like, yeah, it's a complicated thing. Yeah. There's some intricacies here.
Well, and
it's a big book.
It's so true. What's even more complicated about Christianity is that the Bible talks about like, to crave spiritual milk, like a newborn baby. I think like, when you're in your early phases of Christianity, like that's what you get. You get the milk, right? And then as you hopefully begin to mature, like I don't think Kanye's at the point where he's eating some spiritual steak yet, right? So
no, not at all.
But at the same time, like the more you dive into Christianity, the more that you realize that there's actually like not only is it just complicated, but what Christians believe is on its own full spectrum of different beliefs, right? So you've got different like evangelicals and Reformed theologians and Episcopalians, and you've got all these different expressions of Christianity. So it's like, the more I'm trying to learn, the more I'm actually confused, because like I don't know what to think, which path to take. There's one group of Christians who are saying we should be more outspoken on this, another group of Christians who are feeling like, no, this is the main issue, and trying to figure out how to navigate. Like we have overcomplicated it for these new Christians walking in and trying to say like, okay, how do I live this out? What am I supposed to believe? And how am I supposed to, allow that belief to reflect back in my life? 2 Corinthians 3:18 calls us to be a reflection of Christ, so that we are like unveiled faces who all reflect the glory of God. Well, when you muddy all of that up with all of these different theologies that are all supposed to be under the same umbrella of Christianity, like it can be really, really complicated. So I don't know. I think it's just hard to be able to to be a Christian and to make everybody happy in Christianity. I think another person that we didn't mention was like a Chris Pratt, who's, also like taken different stances on similar topics to Lauren Daigle, but they've are not taken similar stances. They've been asked similar questions, but have taken very different stances and get very different responses from different Christians. So it's overly complicated.
Yeah, and it's really dangerous. That sparked a thought, and it might be a bit of a departure from the conversation, but I was watching a video the other day. Oh, thank you. This is a very fluid podcast.
Yes.
I was watching a video the other day, about former addicts and, their journey through recovery. And there was this one woman who talked about she didn't want to go to rehab because all the times she had tried it, it was so clicky. That was her big complaint. I was like, people don't want to go to the place for healing because it's too clicky. Right. And then I think of, okay, we've got Lutherans, we've got Christian, we've got Assemblies of God, we've got Catholics, we've got Baptist. And we have become clicky. Yeah. And if we want a house of healing for recovery for people, spiritual healing, we need to fix that problem. Because people are not attracted, it's not appealing to people to have all these cliques. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to hear from, my internship heard from a Lutheran pastor. And I remember being like, what does this guy believe? I'm a little worried. I don't know. And then, you know what? We had a conversation. It was a phenomenal conversation, a lot of great insight. And I think we're a lot more similar than we think. But we've divided ourselves into these camps. Yeah. And to the outside world, it only looks like more division. I think the world right now is marked by a lot of division, whether that political, racial, whatever. I don't think that the church can adapt that. I think if the church is going to be fruitful and if the church is going to be kingdom-minded, that we cannot keep that culture. Right. And there's certain things from the world that we might take, some maybe business strategies we'll implement, but that is one thing from the world I don't know that we can keep because it draws people away and it pushes people out. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's very scary. And I want to ask, as we're talking about, are we displaying the heart of God? Are we getting off the mark as a church? Do you think Kanye himself is accurately displaying the heart of God?
Again, it's a very overly complicated question, I think. It's a great question. It's just so hard to answer because, again, we are literally watching someone live out their faith journey. Exactly. There's people who are close to me in my life who have watched me grow, who have watched me, walk out my faith journey, but you're talking about millions and millions of people watching Kanye, explore and walk out this faith journey. So, again, and it's so complicated. I think there's some things that he's doing really well, and there's other things that you could question or be like, okay, where are you going with that? But again, he's drinking spiritual milk, right? Yeah. He just. It's a couple years. He's a couple years in. I don't expect it. I mean, yeah, like we mentioned earlier, he's got this maybe this early childhood foundation of having been exposed to Christianity and faith in Jesus Christ. But at the same time, I feel like in the last couple years is when he's really taken it seriously or done his best to take it seriously. I just don't want to get to the point where because we are sitting back judging whether or not he's doing a good job of living out his Christian faith in the public square, that we end up discouraging him from continuing to pursue the things of God. And he's like, well, this just isn't worth it because I'm taking crap from every side of this, and I don't know how to do this, and this is way too hard and way too complicated for me. And so so I'm just gonna give up on this hope that I've found that has been life-changing for me, but now doesn't feel worth it enough, right? I think there's I've referenced a lot of passages, but I want to be careful of what Jesus warned us against in Matthew 5 or somewhere in Matthew, where he talks about us becoming these whitewashed tombs, where we on the outside can appear really we've got it together. And I think for us who have been Christians for a while, we know how to appear or to look like we are these freshly painted, good-looking Christians on the outside, but on the inside, our hearts are corrupt, right? So I don't want to, because we are publicly watching him walk out his faith, I don't want to get to the point where we're like, no, you got to paint this surface to make it look better, even though your heart is still corrupt. We'll worry about that later. I want to just let it be authentic and genuine and be like, man, I see the struggle. Let's keep working through it. And unfortunately, you're going to have to walk through it with everybody watching, but maybe that's a better representation of what Christianity on the long term looks like, is to see the bumps in the road and and still try to make it work. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that there's this mindset that like in life you're either an optimist or a pessimist. I think maybe in a more important question is, are you an encourager or a discourager? Because I mean that has, you can be an optimist and never ever encounter a problem and you'll just ignore everything. But an encourager will say, yeah, this is tough, but here's how we're going to figure it out, and here's what's great about your situation. And I think we look at this, and I go in so often as a discourager, and I'm like, Kanye just said Jesus give us wealth and water. That's not what the Bible's about. And then I completely overlooked that the fact that he said Jesus is Lord, or that, you know, like my life is his, I'm no longer my own. Like there's so much to be encouraged by, and there's so much to encourage Kanye with. Yeah. But I think we only ever come at him with the problems. It was like, this album isn't true gospel because here's this. Like, I remember really early on, I saw someone like tweet out a Bible verse about like beware of false prophets, and then a picture of Kanye. Yeah. I was like, what does that do to so our perception? What does that do to people's view of us? Right. Like, can you imagine where your heart's at? Right. Where like the album's called Jesus is King, and you call it a false prophet. I was like, I think that there's so much more to be encouraged by than we think. Yeah. And I think that we are very, very negative in our mindset. And I think if we can make that shift, then, like you said, the question of, like, is he accurately portraying the heart of God becomes a lot more simple. It's like, well, he's drinking spiritual milk, so yes and no. There are areas where we're going to have grace, and there's areas where we're going to be really, really happy for him. Yeah. But I think as this conversation develops, it's important as, like, what have you personally, like, what have you learned from this situation? Because I know that, like, throughout watching Kanye and then people's reaction to Kanye, I think I've learned a lot about culture and Christian culture, and it's really played a part in my life. But what have you learned from this?
Yeah, I think one of the important reminders for me has just been to check the Pharisee inside of me and to recognize, like, again, we're all people in process, and I can't expect someone else's journey to be in the same spot where my journey is, and just kind of like, again, I would rather be defined or known for being an encourager than a discourager. And so whether it's Kanye West or Justin Bieber or any of the others, like, I want to just be someone who's like, yes, like, go for it. And I don't want to be the one who's like, well, I don't know about this guy. I don't know. I'm sitting back in the wings just waiting for him to mess up, right? Like, I don't want to be the guy who's just waiting for him to mess up or fail. I want to be someone who's like championing them and like, you know, encouraging them along. So I think it's been a healthy reminder for me in my faith journey to just not be so critical or hyper judgmental, to not be the one who's trying to judge the intentions of the heart, but to just be someone who's like celebrating the fact that someone's made a decision and is trying their best to live it out in their faith in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think something that for me I've learned that it makes me more hopeful is that, you know, if Kanye can make it, anybody can make it. I think like Christians keep this little list of everyone in their lives that they want to, you know, come to Jesus. And I can look at that list and be like, well, that person, well, they've got this and this and this. I don't know if they'll ever really make it to Jesus. If Kanye can make it, anyone can make it. Exactly. And I think that gives me a lot of hope that, like, God is not weak in restoration. God is not weak in bringing people back to his heart. It's not something that God is disinterested or apathetic about. He's not passive. And so, like, just the same way that God chased after Kanye's heart, he was back and forth many, many, many years, but now in a place where he's able to say Jesus is Lord, that's a product of God's heart for him. And God has that same heart for all of his children. And so it gives me a lot of hope. And it gives me a lot of faith in God, and that's super important. Like, as a Christian with non-Christian friends, if you have hope and you have faith, you are that much better equipped to be a light of Jesus. I want to ask, just speaking of being a light of Jesus, if you could give Kanye one message, what would it be?
Man, I think it would probably have to be like, keep enduring, keep persisting, keep going. Don't be discouraged. Don't get down by other people's discouragement about you. Like, just keep pursuing God. Keep doing your best to try to figure it out. You're not going to figure it all out next week, but just keep doing your best to try to figure it out and to use the platform that God's given you to live an authentic journey of faith. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think my message to Kanye would be, when's that next album coming out? I want more.
One more, yes.
Yeah, that's really all that I had to say on Kanye, and I'm happy that the conversation has been had because I think it's really important.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. I'm glad that we got to talk about our man Kanye a little bit, his exploration of faith. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for asking such great questions.
Absolutely,
and I think this has been a great conversation. Hope you guys join us again for the next episode as we explore some more ways that as Christians we're to react to things that are happening in our culture. We super appreciate those of you guys who are watching, listening. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you just listen in each week or each episode, and we'll see you guys again soon.
Later.